Si vous avez tous maintenant
So, if you have a headset now, I have the privilege to welcome, we have the privilege to welcome Nicolas Hulot, who is the special envoy of the French president for the protection of the planet. And he's also the chair, and I insist on that, he's the chair of the Nicolas Hulot Foundation. And I think that, Nicolas, it is because you are chairing this foundation that you are the French president's special envoy. This means that you have a freedom of speech, and it's something that is extremely important at such a specific occasion. So I'd like you to welcome Nicolas Hulot. So Nicolas, obviously, feel free to say what you want to say, but there's one question I'd like to ask you, because James, you know, he was talking about the Guardian and how it changes, how it changed between Copenhagen and Paris. And, you know, around Copenhagen, you know, the Guardian really mobilized the international media because they had this, those articles that were published throughout the world. And this article really was saying that we have this climate thing that is extremely important, it's serious, and we need to react. We want our leaders to react in Copenhagen. And 6 years down the road, you know, the Guardian is not launching a similar initiative because people are seeing the Paris conference differently as they were seeing the Copenhagen conference. And the campaign that you launched is the divestment campaign. And the question I'm going to ask to Nicolas is the following. So we'll have this amazing campaign. Citizens are going to be mobilized, you know, in favor of international solidarity, in favor of divestment. But we have the feeling that within the specific framework of the United Nations, of COP21, the main topics might be different. So how can we establish a link between those campaigns and between COP21? Thank you, Yannick.
Étape très clairement qui a été franchie.
So there is one step that has been reached, and we can't do away with it, and is that of awareness raising. I think that, you know, we can say that more or less everyone now is aware of the issue. This is not our priority anymore. Then there is a second step that needs to be reached, and that is that of Paris, that of consistency. Because words are not sufficient, and commitments aren't sufficient either. And I think that all the energy that has been spent by the political world, by the civil society, by the various stakeholders that are represented here in this room today, I think that we will be able to assess how useful this has been in Paris if the 195+1 commitment by the states will allow us to reach this 2-degree trajectory. But my fear is that this path, that this trajectory will not be fixed in Paris. But is this what really counts? What is important? I mean, do we want to be on the trajectory? And do we want to identify how inconsistent the various decisions are going to be? No, that will prevent us from reaching this 2-degree target. So in my view, what is really important is that the commitments that will be made in Paris, you know, we need to make sure that we adopt the right tools. This is as important as the commitments that are going to be made. And our responsibility in Paris, you know, to make things clear, you know, the responsibility will be that of our heads of state. And they will have lots of time before the Paris conference. And you know that the heads of state will join the conference when it is at the opening of the conference. But let's hope that they won't simply repeat those promises and that they will simply express their regrets. All we can hope for is that all those heads will make a specific number of commitments so that we can really enter into a new era, one that is credible. Because it's not about intent, it really is about the means that are going to be used in order to achieve our targets. And it's the details, the methods are going to be important. So we will have a climate package, the commitments made by the states, the commitments made by other economic stakeholders, and I do hope that we will have such commitments. We'll also have commitments made by local governments, and those are extremely important. I know that Anne Hidalgo is already working on such commitments together with the other mayors of other major cities. But before Paris and in Paris, regardless of the outcome of Paris, I hope that there will be other commitments that will be at least as important as the agreement itself. And amongst those commitments, and those commitments could be made on 2 occasions. And at the latest, at the G20 summit in Turkey, I will be in Turkey with Mr. Ban Ki-moon's special envoy next week in order to convince Mr. Erdogan to make sure that climate is an important issue at the G20 summit 2 weeks before the Paris summit. Because we're talking about a small number of countries that are high emitters, high CO2 emitters. So they will have this great opportunity to launch this specific trajectory. And as you know, if you want to commit to carbon neutrality in 2050, well, let's take note. No, that's okay with me. But who will be here to make sure that those commitments are actually achieved? I could also commit to invest $100 million per year as of 2020 in order to support most vulnerable countries and help them adapt to climate change and also help them develop using clean technologies, as was done in Copenhagen. But there's a lot to do because I tend to meet a lot with southern countries, with African countries, and people simply don't trust us anymore. Now, the fact is not that we are not sincere. No, the problem is that we don't have the right capacities to do so because we haven't decided to be consistent yet, or we haven't really understood how important it is to be consistent. So if you want to enter a low-carbon economy, that is a real low-carbon economy that generates jobs, that allows us to rebalance our climate, although we know it might be too late. So how can we do so if we still accept $650 million of tax credits granted to companies that deal with fossil fuels, for example? How can we have a low-carbon economy that is attractive, that is efficient, if we don't have a carbon pricing, as was suggested by Pascal Canfin, so that we could reach a single carbon price, so that we make sure that each investor really understands that the price of fossil fuels will never go down anymore. So those are essential issues. And this is the only way to restore trust. This is the only way to make sure that the Paris conference is credible. Now, how can we convince our African colleagues and counterparts? When we see that the commitments made in Copenhagen regarding the 100 million investments, or commitments per year, while we'll have only gathered $10 million so far. Because we know that those countries don't have the money in their existing budgets. So we will never be able to achieve those commitments if there is no financial shift. 2 weeks ago, I was in India. This country is a complex country. It's stuck between two types of commitments. First, repeated by President Modi, that's the commitment that he made while he was campaigning. He promised his citizens that 300 million Indians would have access to energy within 10 years. And at the same time, he promised 300,000 Indians that they would have a 24/7 access to energy instead of 1 hour per day right now. And at the same time, he realizes that his country will obviously be strongly impacted by climate change. Displacements, displaced people, and other types of impacts, such as the impacts on food supply in India. So what did the Indians said? They said, well, we're okay, with getting rid of our coal, but either you provide us with clean technologies, and we all know that transferring technologies is not an easy issue, and as Mr. Coffin was saying, all topics are complex, because most patents do not belong to the state, and even though this were the case, and the best thing that we can do to help India isn't to provide them with the money to have access to those technologies. No, it really is about allocation. And I was referring to 15 states earlier on. And if those 15 states decided to invest massively into clean energies and into energy-efficient technologies, for example, if the Juncker plan had been designed for this purpose, then you will speed up a natural trend, that is the decrease in the price of fossil fuels, because that energy becomes competitive, as it is already the case in South Africa. So when it has become competitive, then all the states have to do is to use it as a guarantee for long-term loans, for example, or zero-interest loans. But in order to achieve this, we need to make sure that what we've been talking about today becomes a reality. It's not just about energy transition. We know that we're talking about thousands of millions of dollars, but we need to be able to trigger that transition. And France has made that commitment and is still committed to this target. So I can confirm that I was told by the President himself that France will not subsidize coal-fired plants, because there is no clean coal, contrary to what some people might say.
C'est effectivement le désinvestissement, la fin des.
So consistency is disinvestment and other commitments as well that can be made by local governments and local authorities that the governments can take as well. If you have to have sources of low carbon in the public sphere, this is also a great lever for us to move towards low carbon. Public orders represent 15 or 20% of production or consumption. Now, maybe I'm the only one in this room not to be an economist, but 15 or 20% is the industrial benchmark. If this is the industrial benchmark, then it's going to be good for the producers and the consumers to be in this group. This is what I mean by consistency. And I'd like to congratulate 350.org to underscore this. Because, you know, these climate negotiations, and I've seen that, these negotiations is like a stacking of papers and wishes and wishful thinking, and each state is trying to interpret the notion of common yet differentiated reliability and responsibility. But we should look at things with the distance. The success of the climate conference is based on these tools: the price of carbon, the end of subsidies, and the changeover towards investments, the openness of financial portfolios, so that everybody, starting with me, so that everybody knows where to invest their savings. These are the essential topics. They're essential. And if some players decide to do this, if it succeeds in Paris, it'll have a lever effect. If people are disappointed in Paris, it'll be slightly mitigated. So the topic of financing, to me, is an essential topic. Well, as long as we open up as well, open up to things that have never been done before, like innovative financing. How can we rebuild the trust with our African friends so as to help them develop? And this is what is going to be discussed during the General Assembly of the United Nations, and our support to help them adapt as well. Now, how can we do this if we do not include industries that have organized themselves so as not to participate in this solidarity effort? This, to me, is the Paris equation. And technically and practically speaking, this is what it boils down to. But maybe Paris also could be encapsulated in the following sentence, which is, not long ago, I was in Morocco, in Rabat, and to receive the contribution from Morocco. Morocco, like Indonesia and Egypt, has already started disinvesting, and they've stopped subsidizing fuel here, or oil there, or gas there, etc. So when I received their contribution, Morocco's contribution, it was done in a solemn way with representatives from different African countries. And in the room, all of a sudden, there's this African woman. And by the way, I can't remember which country she was coming from. And she stood up and she said something to me. Well, not personally to me, but to me because I was here to represent the country that was going to host the climate conference. She said, "Mr. Hulot, don't you forget when you're back in Paris to tell people that during the Paris conference you're going to decide who's going to die or who's going to who's going to live, because this is what's at stake in Paris. Fossil fuels are against the climate, the CO2, methane, and you might say what you want. You might believe what you want. You know, people will try and make the most of the cash cow, but we have to divest from fossil fuels. We couldn't have said this that clearly in Copenhagen, but now we know. The only thing we need to do is to have consistent investments to support of these measures. Thank you very much for your attention.